want to start with some celebration. We saw this room transform this week. The last time I saw it, there was a lot of stuff in here. And so you can tell something has happened. Well, our Little Angels attic sale, this year, this sale, in fact, raised $30,000 more than our last one, $84,122. Through a lot of hard work, some from just a few folks, and you know who you are, and I'm super grateful. But that means over $25,000, 70% goes back to the seller, 30% goes to organizations supporting women and children, so over $25,000, including $1,000 to New Beginnings Therapy Writing, the Heaven Sent Charity. A lot of good. That's come out of that. So grateful for that. I'm grateful for those of you who are online who maybe like me were not able to be here last week. My wife and daughter and I were texting about Weston's sermon in real time, live texting, and it was good. The line about God is not really like eating your bran cereal, kind of stuck with my college student. And so grateful for the kicking off the Jonah series last week, and Weston doing such a great job. And Weston actually wrote this series many years ago, and so it was appropriate for him to kick it off, and I'm grateful to get in on it today because I love the book of Jonah. Not the kid version, not the Sunday school version, but the adult one that we will try to get to. I like it partly because it's a whopper of a fish story, and I love fish stories. I love to tell fish stories. I love to exaggerate. I caught a fish one time that was so big. It was so big that the picture weighed 10 pounds. You laughed more on that one. I'll take it. Yeah, there's a lot of exaggeration in Jonah, and that is to prove a point. Sometimes the scriptures will blow something up so big that we can't help but see it. And there's a lot of that in those 48 verses. Almost everything is exaggerated. Here are some examples. God sends Jonah to the most evil people that we can think of. The worst of the worst. The Ninevites. It's exaggerated. Why? Well, maybe to say if God cares about those people, then maybe he cares about everybody. Jonah, in a radical way, represents a development of Israel's theology, an understanding of their chosenness, their understanding of God's cosmic and global aspirations, the idea that maybe God is for everybody. Maybe God chose us for special responsibility, not just special relationship. And that dynamic plays out in us all the time. Another exaggeration, when God calls Jonah to go to Nineveh, Jonah immediately gets up and what? Goes as far away as possible in the other direction. It's exaggerated, 2,500 miles to Tarshish. You could not go further away. It is the end of the earth that way. Why? Why is that exaggerated? Well, maybe you feel that, right? We go to great lengths to keep our distance from God and from each other. We instinctively know that as long as we keep our distance from each other, we can maintain our differences with each other. Now tell me that doesn't speak to our time, right? This is what Jonah is ultimately about, and ultimately we will get to a big fat question mark at the end, which is the invitation and the kind of the question mark of our lives. Are we going to let God's work in us, God's grace given to us, be the thing that propels us to give grace to others, or are we just going to keep it for ourselves? And Jonah doesn't answer the question. It leaves us kind of hanging like unsteady. If you're looking for this to be a happy ending where everything gets tied up, it's not going to happen because there's a lot at stake in this. Jonah ends up struggling with this. And so he keeps his distance. He increases his distance from the people God is sending him to. Jesus did exactly the opposite, by the way, didn't he? He bridged the gap between us. He decreased the space between us. We might say what might that say about the extremes of our times, the way we kind of want to keep that distance or keep going to our extremes? to keep the distance between us and those we might consider a threat. But you can't claim Jesus and maintain your distance. If you claim to follow Jesus, you're accepting his call to bridge all distance. I like the words of Greg Boyle on this. He writes, "Everybody is somebody, nobody is nobody, no us and them, just us." And that is the book of Jonah. That is what is at stake in the book of Jonah. And it's exaggerated in extremes for extreme times like ours. I don't think there's a book more contemporary. But no aspect of Jonah is more exaggerated than the great big old fish that God provides to save Jonah. Jonah has been on a downward spiral. And in Jonah 1, that word down is used 4 times for emphasis to help us understand that he's going down. He's not going the right direction. So when God says get up, and the positional language is up, get up and go, Jonah gets up and goes down. He goes down to Joppa, and then he goes down. It's a little bit lost in the translation, but when he goes aboard the ship, that's a downward too. So he goes down onto the ship, and then he goes down into the ship, and then eventually what? He goes down into the sea, into the depths. We would say he's scraping the bottom of the barrel. He is at the rock bottom. Jonah's disobedience and his resistance have led him to the place where he is at the lowest of the low. And in a sense, it kind of doesn't matter how you get there, whether it's because of your own doing or because of your situation. But like the prodigal son in the New Testament, Jonah finds himself eating the food of the pigs that he's been sent to take care of. It's low. As low as you can go, into the murky depths, into the foundations of the earth, to be swallowed up by the sea, which always represents, in some sense or another, chaos, into the murky depths where the seaweed is wrapped around your head. Isn't that like a great image, by the way? Where you're kind of caught up in the seaweed. Into the storm that represents chaos and death. Here at his lowest point, the lowest of the low, when Jonah is experiencing the natural consequence of his action, of his rebellion, God sends salvation in the form of a great big fish. Now, let's be clear on this. Sometimes we tell the story and the fish gets kind of described as part of the punishment. But that's not the story, is it? No, the fish is not punishment, it's rescue, it is intervention, it is God's ability to navigate through his creation that sea and its chaos. The fish mysteriously can live underwater, and now Jonah can too. The fish's salvation, in fact, in a big way. There could be a lot of ways, if you think about it, where Jonah could have been saved. Somebody could have thrown him a rope. Why is this point exaggerated? The fish is this over-the-top metaphorical whopper of a tail, larger than life, way of demonstrating God's commitment to save us. You see it. It's big, it's blown up, it's exaggerated so that we can see ourselves in it. And part of our salvation is the perspective that comes from inside the fish. And we all, in some way, if we're human, know what that's like. It's a metaphor. The perspective that comes when we hit rock bottom, when we scrape the bottom of the barrel, when the phone rings and it's the worst news, when the doctor calls and you can't believe it, when you lose the thing that is most valuable to you, when you mess up so bad that it seems that there's no path out. Bottom of the barrel, or in this case, 3 days in the guts of a fish. It's pretty graphic. Pretty descriptive. And there in the belly of the fish, Jonah experiences grace. He should have sunk, he was saved. He discovers what many of us do when we come to the end of ourselves, that at the end of our strength, God's strength begins, that God's ability is revealed in our inability. Eugene Peterson writes about this moment for Jonah. He writes, "The same storms which call our lives into question turn out to be the means by which our lives are saved. Those storms expose us to what we can't manage. We are returning to the primordial chaos, to the formless and void of Genesis 1, where we submit our lives to the world-making Word of God, which hovers over the waters and creates beauty out of chaos of nothingness in us. These storms are not simply bad weather. They are the exposure of our lives to the brooding Spirit of God. In the storm, we are reduced to what is elemental, and the ultimate elemental is God. Maybe you know what that feels like at the lowest of the low, in the midst of the chaos, in the downward spiral, as you have resisted God or as life has thrown you the curveball of curveballs. Yes, and also in that, grace. In that moment, Jonah prays. And he prays a psalm not unlike the other 150 psalms in the Bible. And with the psalms, there are a lot of ways to categorize them, but basically it boils down to two kinds. Either you have a lament psalm or you have a praise psalm. Lament is sort of what you would expect, though the laments always have a turn. So it would be appropriate for Jonah to pray a lament prayer and then to make a turn. But the psalm is much more a song of praise. It's much more focused on gratitude. In my distress, I called on the Lord, and the Lord answered me, is his opening line. From the belly, not of the fish, but he says in the psalm, from the belly of Sheol, from the darkest, murkiest place of the dead, the place of distress and darkness, he listened to my cry. Barbara Brown Taylor writes that she has come to the conclusion that all hope, true hope, is born in the dark. That every life, in fact, begins in darkness, and all hope begins there. She writes, I have learned things in the dark that I could never have learned in the light. Even when light fades and darkness falls, as it does in every single day and in every single life, God does not turn the world over to some other deity. I love thinking of it that way. Because God is the God of the dark too. Here is the testimony of faith. Darkness is not dark to God. The night is as bright as day. There's a prayer that I pray every single funeral. I pray it in some form this way. As we shrink before the mystery of death, may we also catch a glimpse of the light of eternity. This is the paradox of our faith. This is a story of life and death and resurrection. This is 3 days in the belly of the fish, or 3 days in the tomb, in which Jesus is crucified but then is raised and brings salvation to us. And it is in Jonah's prayer, in the midst of all of that, in the belly of the whale, his prayer of gratitude, that the downward language starts to turn. He begins to literally change direction. I'll put it on the screen. The engulfing waters threatened me and the deep surrounded me. Seaweed was wrapped around my head, because I just think that's so descriptive. To the roots of the mountains I sank down. The earth beneath me barred me in forever. But you, Lord, my God, brought my life up. It's so basic, isn't it? It's just the basic turn. I was going down. You brought me up. You brought my life up from the pit. When my life was ebbing away, I remembered you, Lord, and my prayer rose. There it is again. Now, not just himself, but also his response is a prayer rising up to God. And so in this way, the fish marks the most significant moment of Jonah's life. He has talked about salvation. Now he has been saved. There's a difference. Jonah, whose job it was to speak of God's goodness, has experienced it himself, and it changes how he sees things. But this is not a given, is it? Not everybody who finds themselves at the bottom of the barrel, not everybody who experiences tragedy, not everyone who makes their life a mess just waltzes right out of it. Many of us don't. All of us struggle. Why is it that crisis can either make you bitter or it can make you better? What's the difference? This summer we had 3 guys gatherings, is what we called it, because we're really creative and we can think of stuff that's helpful for marketing. 3 guys gatherings to talk about, real talk about life and faith and leadership. And we had 3 speakers, and then guys gathered around in a pub setting and talked about it. One of our speakers was Jeff Goodnight, many of you know, who spoke about life and faith and leadership in the years after the death of his 10-year-old son, Mason. And Jeff shared something on that Thursday night this summer that I had not heard, even though I've walked some of that journey with them. Mason died overnight on April 6, 2017, which was no doubt the worst day of their life. I drove by their house that morning and noticed the police cars and didn't know what was going on. When we found out, I went back, and there were so many people there that I couldn't even get inside. And yet that very evening, less than 24 hours into the worst day of their lives, they sat down, just the three of them, Jeff and Jana and Maggie, and they made a decision. They said, we've got to decide now. This will either tear us apart or it will bring us together. And we must decide. How do you have the wherewithal in that moment to make that turn? And over time, the Goodnights have chosen gratitude. They've been able to find the ability to give thanks for the 10 years they had with their son, not just to grieve the loss of him. It's both things, of course. But they've chosen to be grateful for those 10 years and have created a foundation to continue that goodness to bless others. Dr. Jamie Anton, a cancer survivor and a Christian who researches how people respond to trauma, wrote about that in the Washington Post. Writes, most of us operate from what would be called a just worldview, right? You do good things happen. It's difficult then to make meaning when bad things happen. A colleague of mine deployed to help with a relief agency after Superstorm Sandy met a man whose roof had been blown away by gale-strength winds. This man surprised the relief team with these words, sometimes you have to lose the roof in order to see the stars. Of course, not everybody who goes through a storm in life has that perspective. I remember two very unique experiences in the hours after the tornadoes here. One of the things I discovered was I'm the idiot that runs out into the storm and sees what happens. And so that's what I was doing. The adrenaline took about, 2.5 days to wear off, and there was a point where Jenny said, you were going to have to stop. So, there was a whole thing. But I ran out into the storm. I went to Pastor Laura's house, which was about 100 yards away, and checked on them. And then I went next to the house that had the roof blown off and checked on them and helped them get out. And then I went to the house next door, and the house next door was damaged. It didn't look to be as bad. But I knocked on the door, and my neighbor came out. And at that point, all you could see in the dark was just our little cul-de-sac. And so I didn't know that across the street, houses had been leveled. I didn't know over here. I didn't know. I just knew that those two houses right there had been damaged. And so she said, I'll never forget this, she said, is everybody involved in this? Is everybody damaged? And I thought she was, everybody's house is damaged, and I thought she was really concerned. And I said, no, it's just you two, because that's what I thought at the time, just you two. And she said, well, figures. I'm always the one. As I reflect on my experience of bad things in life, that's usually, if I'm honest, some version of how I respond, isn't it? Isn't that sort of just what we do unless we're intentional about something else? I've told this story a lot, but later that morning we visited Lois Willis, a 103-year-old member of our church at the time. She's almost 107 now. And she asked if we could pray before I left in her living room. The tree's still on her house. She had survived the night. The window next to her had been busted out, and she just laid there and tried to survive the storm alone. And when we prayed, before we prayed, she said, now, when we pray, will you pray for my neighbors, the ones who have really been affected by this? The belly of the fish represents basically any human limitation or challenge and the choice that we make in it. It represents the spiritual paradox of how our human limits can be the path to our spiritual limitation. And it is the opposite of how we think. We think with limits, we are limited, and that is, the belly of the fish is the opposite of that, is that living within constraints where we find freedom. It is Paul saying, at the point I am weak, there at that very point I am strong. Any of our limitations and challenges, the thing that we would be tempted to say about, gosh, I'm always the one. It always happens to me. That thing, the thing that is the thing maybe we wouldn't have chosen. Sometimes we do choose good limits. Think about it. Marriage and parenthood would be an example. Sometimes we choose to not love everybody in the same way so that we can love some people more intensely. And we choose to get married, or we choose to bring children in the world, and then we regret the decision sometimes. Even limits that we don't choose, like illness, and tragedy, and loss and death. In the end, the human limits that we all face that come with aging and the mixed blessing of longevity, these can either be a doubling down of our resistance and our cynicism and our skepticism, or they can be the spiritual school of our sanctification. C.S. Lewis talks about this in Community. We choose to be in community with one another, but then we kind of get disappointed in each other. He talks about this in Life Together. And he says, basically, your brother or sister's disappointing action can be an opportunity for you to learn to be grateful. Grateful for the opportunity to experience forgiveness. But not everyone who faces these sorts of challenges grows from them. And I don't think it just inevitably happens. What is it that shifts the story for us? Well, some of us, when we are in the belly of the fish, learn one of the most important lessons of all. And these words are Weston Williams. I'm going to give him credit, and I'm going to put them on the screen because they're so good. When we can't give thanks for the storm, we can give thanks in it. And there's a difference. But in that decision, in that turn, in that choice, something significant happens. In fact, someone has said, either we choose radical gratitude or we will all succumb to the forces of cynicism and despair. Gratitude, gratefulness, not for the storm, but in it. Our friends Randy and Dorothy Hargis have talked about this a lot in our small group and their experience of that in the really terrible wreck that their daughter Kelly had 10 years ago. And I asked Randy to share. He talked about those days and weeks after her wreck at Vanderbilt Hospital, just trying to do one day at a time and trying to sleep and all that. And he writes, as I tried to rest, I believe God kept showing me how to focus and pray through a song, Casting Crowns, Praise You in the Storm. It became the theme for me during this time. The song addresses maintaining unwavering faith during the heartbreak while still questioning God's plan and why things happen and what God is going to do about it, the belly of the fish. He writes, it ultimately declares that God is still worthy of worship no matter the circumstance. It challenges the notion that faith guarantees an easy life, instead presenting worship as a continuous act of trust, even when it feels like it is still raining. By capturing the perspective of trusting God's ultimate goodness amid the storm, we grasp the hope and encouragement as we face our struggles. So I choose, this is Randy's words, so I choose to keep lifting my hands and praising him in whatever storm is in my path. I told Randy he made the sermon in a good way today, and he said thank you. Here's how Jonah ends the prayer. Those who cling to worthless idols turn away from God's love for them, but I, with shouts of grateful praise, will sacrifice to you. What I have vowed, I will make good. I will say, salvation comes from the Lord. And then this beautiful, descriptive, human understanding of how salvation works. And then the big fish vomited him out for his second chance. Today's message is for those of us who have been in the belly of the big fish.